Today I'm going to tell you about another parable, another story that Jesus told. This story is about a landowner who hired workers for his vineyard. We learn that there were people who felt upset over something that happened in this story. Let's read what the Bible says to find out why. Today I'm reading from the Voice Bible, reading from Matthew's Gospel chapter 20, reading from verse 1 to 16. The kingdom of heaven is like a wealthy landowner who got up early in the morning and went out first thing to hire workers to tend his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a day's wage for a day's work. The workers headed to the vineyard while the landowner headed home to deal with some paperwork. About 3 hours later he went back to the marketplace. He saw some unemployed men standing around with nothing to do. "Do you need some work? Go over to my vineyard and join the crew there. I'll pay you well." So off they went to join the crew at the vineyard. About 3 hours later, and then 3 hours again after that, the landowner went back to the marketplace and saw another crew of men and hired them, sending them off to his vineyard and promising to pay them well. Then finally late in the afternoon, at the cusp of night, the landowner walked again through the marketplace and he saw another group of workers still standing around. "Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us." "Well, you should go over to my vineyard and work." And off the workers went. When quitting time arrived, the landowner called to his foreman, "Pay the workers their day's wage, beginning with the workers I hired most recently, and ending with the workers who have been here all day." So the workers who had been hired just a short while before came to the foreman, and he paid them each a day's wage. The other workers who had arrived during the day were paid, each of them, a day's wage. Finally, those who had been toiling since early morning came thinking that they would be paid more, but the foreman paid each of them a day's wage. As they received their pay, the last group of workers began to protest. "We have been here since the crack of dawn, and you are paying us the exact same wage as you pay the crew who have just turned up. We deserve much more than they do. We have been slogging in the heat of the sun all day. Those others haven't worked nearly as hard or as long as we have." The landowner heard their protests. "Friends, no one has been wronged here today. This isn't about what you deserve. You agreed to work for a day's wage, did you not? So take your money and go home. I can give my money to whoever I please, and it pleases me to pay everyone the same amount of money. Do you think I don't have the right to dispose of my money as I wish? Or does my generosity somehow prick at you? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." So now we know why the first to be employed were upset. They were upset because they didn't get any extra pay for working longer hours. Think for a moment if you were amongst the first hired. How would you have felt? Would you have been upset? Would you have protested like the workers in the story? Would you be angry and thinking, "This isn't fair"? I think it's important before we get caught up in our own emotions that we look more closely at the story. Then we will realise that the landowner kept his promise. The landowner not only fulfilled his contract with those he had hired first, he also paid a full wage to those who might have not expected it. The workers are clearly divided into two classes. The first came to agreement with the landowner. They had a contract. "We will work if you pay us a day's wage." Their contract showed all they were concerned with was to get as much as possible out of their day's work. But in the case of those who engaged later, there was no contract. All they wanted was a chance to work, and they willingly left the reward to the landowner. Perhaps rather than focusing on who got what, the workers could have focused on the landowner's generosity to others. I love the element of human tenderness shown in this parable. For a moment, put yourself in the position of the landowner. Think how difficult it can be to see men and women who are unemployed, those whose talents are not being put to good use because there is nothing for them to do. We are told that in the marketplace, men and women stood waiting because no one had hired them. So now put yourself in their position, waiting to be hired, hanging about all day, just waiting for someone to come along and offer you the opportunity to work and an opportunity to earn cash. Perhaps some of these men were feeling the burden or the responsibility of feeding their families. We don't know their circumstances, but I'm sure if not all of us, then most of us will remember an experience of waiting to be picked or selected for something. Maybe the school football team, the school hockey team, or even worse. My memory is always of when we had to do social dance for PE, when the teachers made the girls choose the boys to be our dancing partner. Could life have got any more embarrassing? The whole process of getting chosen last can be a very deflating experience. But in this story, the landowner, in his compassion and generosity, offered the men work to do. This is an incredible story where we learn what it means to act as God acts, with generosity to all. This parable of the vineyard worker shows reward will not depend on the amount of work done, but on God's generous grace. These men did not all do the same work, but they did receive the same pay. There are two great lessons for us here. The first is it is not about the amount of service given, but the love in which it is given that matters. God does not look at the amount of service. As long as we have given all that we have to give, all service ranks the same with God. The second lesson is even greater and even more important. All God gives is of grace. We cannot earn what God gives. We cannot deserve it. What God gives us is given out the goodness of his heart. What God gives us is not pay, but a gift. Not a reward, but grace. And as we go through life, people, including ourselves, will always express anger for something that is unfair. But we must remember that God's view of fair is not the same as our human understanding. Maybe the next time that you are in a situation that seems unfair, you can think carefully about the bigger picture. Look for the positives and remember this story. And consider that we shouldn't just work for our own benefit or for more rewards for ourselves, but for the benefit of all.